Well, good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening, and welcome to this networking seminar from the Orality Network. We're just delighted to be here. We'll be talking today about a really great title, In His Image, Reaching New Europe Through Oral Communication. My name is Ricki Gidoomal. I grew up in the UK, that's my connection with Europe. I live in Israel and serve with a non-profit and academic institution that trains Bible translators, but also serve together with Billy and our brother Samuel Chang as catalysts for the orality movement, catalyst for orality with the Lausanne movement. In that time, I also co-authored and produced Master Storyteller, which was about oral communication in the Bible. Some of that will come into this seminar today. Have with me Billy and Billy Coppedge. Could you just introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm glad to, Ricki. It is a joy to be able to join you all. And I know Ricki and I are very excited about this. We've been praying over our time together, even if it is virtually. My name is Billy Coppedge. My wife is Joanna. We have 5 children. We live and work in Uganda alongside Africa Gospel Church. That's kind of one of our primary roles. But we lived in the UK, up in Scotland for a number of years. So that is one of our European connections. I also get to serve alongside Ricki as a catalyst for orality with the Lausanne movement. And I'm excited about our conversation today and the good things God has as we discuss how do we use orality, how do we reflect the image of God, and how do we share a heart for Europe.
Great, thanks, Billy. So tell me, before we start, and just for you watching and taking part in this, we're going to do this more as a conversation. We wanted to really speak together and converse on this topic, really in an oral fashion. So tell me as we start, Billy, since we're here and talking on orality, it's a term that I think sometimes is often misunderstood. So when you hear the word orality, what does that conjure up for you? What do you hear, or what do you think is heard with the term orality?
You know, I think in some ways orality has become a bit of at least in certain mission circles, people that have a missional mindset, orality has become a bit of a hot topic. And if I can say, over the last few years, typically it is synonymous with oral storytelling. And certainly that's how I got introduced to orality over a decade ago. And I think for a lot of people, that has been kind of their go-to. Usually people start with Bible storytelling, and then it kind of leads into not just storytelling, but other art forms, whether it's music or dance or visual arts. It's kind of like, okay, what are other non-textual forms of communicating? And those are very valid and legitimate in their own right. I think, Ricki, one of our concerns, though, is that at times it gets kind of stereotyped into this sense of, oh, and we presented something in an oral way, as if we were trying to simplify the message, or almost in the sense of wanting to offer it in a way that's not quite as sophisticated. And I think that those connotations we want to avoid and stay away from. I think that's not what we're going for. And I think it's worth kind of just trying to say, okay, how do we, and maybe you could help us do this, how do we unpack orality in a way that is not simplistic or kind of reductionistic, but is actually, it's saying, no, this is something that is real legitimate, real traction for today. I don't know, maybe you'd want to unpack that a little bit for us.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, what I hear from you is, in that common perspective of orality, then, is that it's kind of more like a tool in the box of many things that I could use missiologically, like a strategy. Hey guys, we're going to do orality today, sort of thing. And if it doesn't work, we'll go back to street preaching or door-to-door evangelism. You know, it's a tool in the box. Whereas I think what we've come to understand, and I think what I see, is that we're talking about orality is much more tied up in who we are, and perhaps how God chose to communicate with us. And then by extension, like the title of our seminar, you know, us as made in his image, you know, we're talking about something that's really connected to who we are and some of our primary communication methods as humans. Now I've got 5 to 7 minutes on our schedule took us, to share a little bit what it took us a couple of years to capture and in the stuff that we've written. And so we'll see what we can do. But in true oral fashion, I'm going to tell a story. I was taken back as we were preparing to January 2016, when I was sitting in an office with some of our team, and we were beginning to reflect on oral communication, thinking about the story of creation. And what came out of that brief time together was so rich, actually, it left us as a small team in awe, because we were thinking about creation and the story of creation when, as far as we understand, there was no single written word going on in the garden. But actually, we saw the ways that God was discipling Adam and Eve, how he brought them to come to know him in a richer way before we have any record of written language. I'd love to do this as a devotional and get perspectives from others in the room, but we are limited to our format. So here are just some of the things that we were thinking, and I'm sure there's much more, but we start with a story, and he made Adam and he saw the need for a helper. Actually, in this process, he brought teamwork and family. He gave Adam responsibility to name the animals, to take care of the garden. This was actually part of a calling. It was, an embodiment of a calling. He walked with Adam and Eve in the cool of the garden. This was relationship, actually. He provided them. That was care. But then at the same time, he gave boundaries, and there were clear consequences for their actions. And, no better, perhaps, teaching on justice and the consequence of sin. And then, in those moments after the fall, we have just a really touching moment where God kills an animal to clothe Adam and Eve. And you can see that, some people say this was the first sacrifice, but also there's a touch of restoration and mercy. And, just think about all of those really deep principles just captured in such a small story, where we have no record of anybody reading a scroll or handing out a book or, giving a 5-point sermon. We've got truth there. And then go beyond that, actually, think about creation itself. We have this multimedia display of the glory of God through color, sound, taste, smell, touch. And I'm just, as I was preparing, I was imagining myself standing at the foothills of Himalayas and looking up and hearing the words, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Just imagine that with that creation in front of us versus, being emailed a 3-point sermon on the glory of God. Which one would communicate to me more? Far less words, far richer result. So in my view, I believe we've been designed to connect with all that's around us somehow beyond that textual level. And as we've studied into the biblical story, we actually see God doing that too. We see as the community of God, the people of the Israelites, as they come together and as he gathers them, actually God deals with them in different ways. And again, only a limited number of those seem to have a written textual sort of practice, as it were. I mean, I'm just to throw out a few in the few minutes I have. I was thinking, coming out of slavery in Egypt, they've been slaves for 400 years, and there's people who wants to gather them together. And then you see this really ironic, actually, but sad chain of events. If you go to Exodus 20, Moses goes up to the mountain, and God gives him this intricate detail of how to use their skills, come together as a community, bring all they have to build the tabernacle. And they were meant to bring their skills, their time, their effort, their energy into building the tabernacle. At the same time as God's giving this plan, what's going on down below? The people are coming together, they're giving their jewelry, their time, and sadly, they're building this, golden calf. So whether rightly or wrongly, actually, this oral community wants to participate together. It seems to be a foundational principle almost. And then you see actually this incredible relationship that God creates with the people of Israel, because he gives them commands that involve speaking, listening, hearing with the whole heart and body. If you've ever heard of the Shema from Deuteronomy 6? Hear, O Israel. Even that word, hear. It's not a read, O Israel. And then all of the commands that come before it. Jesus says this is the greatest commandment, and all the hearers they'd have known, because they'd have recited this day and night. And all of those words, write it on your doorposts. Speak about it as you get up, as you rise. Talk about it with your children. Meditate on it. All of these were action words, and somehow God was asking this community to engage with the word and with his commandments, really as a community. And so what we see is this oral culture participating and experiencing and growing and walking together in a very active way. So we have participation, we have other forms that do come in, singing, music. I did this challenge recently, thinking about your favorite songs growing up. Some of them I actually learned before I could read, but I can remember the lyrics. Did I ever see them written down? Probably not. So actually the memory, the way that memory combines with rhythm and repetition and melody, again, God gives Moses songs to sing over the people of Israel. He gives Mary songs. There's songs, there's deep songs that come into scriptures. And then quickly we think about the feasts and the festivals and the traditions. And as in my family, we live in Israel, so we celebrate the Passover together. That's one of our favorite times of the year. But it's not just about the meal. I mean, it is about the meal and the smells and the things, but there's furniture, there's the menu, there's the clothing, there's the lighting, and every single element actually has a symbol, it has a story behind it, that has a teaching, and we understand and we remember those things. And we think about how God commanded the people of Israel to remember, and he said, do this each year. And then some 1,000 years later or more, Jesus comes into that Passover and he says, do this in remembrance of me. So clearly action and this kind of conflagration of tradition and ritual and rhythm and music and participation can come together in an exciting way, actually. But I've talked a lot now. And I realize that what I'm talking about is there's a lot of intangible element to it, which is scary for those of us like me that like to have things packaged up in a theory and a formula with a bow on top. So could you, Billy, just elaborate some on some of those intangibles that we experience and how we can relate to those in terms of communication?
No, it's just good. And I love hearing it, Ricki, because you get so excited about all the ways that God is communicating. And I think about the rituals, the Passover meals, the furniture, even, just the lampstand in the tabernacle, those kind of things. They are communicating meaning. They're conveying meaning in certain ways. And it's a lot of it is nonverbal. Or it's either nonverbal or non-textual. And what I'm intrigued, though, is I'm intrigued by the way that we perceive meaning. And I think this is a piece that we need to delve into a little bit. And it's a piece I've missed. And what I want to suggest is one of the primary ways we perceive meaning, or the way Jesus helped us recognize or interpret meaning when people are trying to communicate, is through our bodies. And which in some ways we acknowledge is pretty straightforward. And in some ways, usually most of us think of how do I interpret meaning? It's through my mind, it's through my brain. But this is my question and the little litmus test. How, when you and your wife, so you're married, I'm married, both of us at one point, in university, just after university, are kind of pursuing our wives and hoping to get married. How did you know when she was attracted to you?
It was the letter she wrote me. Or did that? No, I'm.
Was it the letter? Was it the letter? Yeah. At some level, we use words. There's no doubt, and oftentimes we use texts. But let me ask you this question: how did you know when she was flirting with you? Did she hold up a sign? It's like, oh, I'm attracted. I'm flirting with you. It's like, no,
probably not. No.
I mean, yeah, at least in my situation. So my wife's Joanna, and it was be like, we could be in a crowded place, we could be at church, we could be, in a big group. And suddenly it's like she'd look at me in a certain way. She would either turn her face towards me or turn her face away from me. There'd be a shrug of her shoulders, but there was something in her body language that suddenly it was like, oh, she's communicating with me. And I just use that as a way to kind of introduce the concept to say, I think our bodies, God designed the way we communicate. He made our bodies so significant for trying to recognize that.
Absolutely, but obviously it must be a little more than just flirting. I mean, what more can you communicate on that, or tell us about that sense of embodiment, or how can we relate to it beyond the sort of the day-to-day?
I want to suggest it plays a big part. And I want us to turn just briefly to look at our theology of communication, which I want to suggest most of us as pastors, missionaries, folks involved in the kingdom, we never take much time. We think practically about communication, but do we think theologically? And I want to just go back to our title, that phrase, Imago Dei, the image of God. And it's worth asking, if we're made in the image of God, regardless of our ethnicity, regardless of our gender, regardless of our social or educational status, regardless of where we're at in Europe or elsewhere in the world, we're all made in the image of God. We agree on that. But the question is who's God? Like, what is God like? And in what way do we reflect his image? And I want to suggest this is deeply related to our identity, but also how we communicate. And I think God himself, he's one God, but he's the three-person God. And it's that beautiful doctrine of the Trinity. I want to suggest it has great implications for us as we try and think missionally about our communication. He's in constant, continual interpersonal communication. And we, made in his image, were made to reflect that kind of deep interpersonal communion. And I think that's what orality has to offer. There's advantages to textual media, there's advantages to digital media, but there is something in the embodied interpersonal oral engagement when you and I are sitting together that reflects the very nature and character of God in a unique way. Now, you say, Billy, help me understand. Well, I want to suggest, of course, God uses text. Of course, he uses objects. Of course, he uses rituals. All those are part of his communication strategy. But I want to suggest the embodiment piece is significant. God is spirit, but he recognized and realized our limitations. We're not just spirit. We are spiritual, but we also are embodied. And so what does Jesus do? Or what is the miracle? Let me say that. What's the miracle of our gospel? The gospel is our God, who is spirit, decided to realize that for divine persons and human persons to be in true fellowship, to have true communication, the divine person was going to have to pull skin on. And he did that in the second person of the Trinity. John 1:14, the word became flesh and dwelt among us. And I think that is an incredibly theological, but also an incredibly significant passage for our understanding of communication. And I think it relates in a couple of ways, because I think it privileges not just embodiment, but also orality in a significant way. You say, Billy, what do you mean? Okay, well, I wonder if most of us think communication happens in our brains. It's like we process things and then we make a decision, and it all happens kind of in the cognitive region of our brains. But the stories we shared a little bit ago, I think what we're trying to get at is we're trying to say no. And I think cognitive interpersonal science is trying to help us understand is no, meaning is conveyed so often in the body and through bodily senses, more on the register of like the imagination and intuition. So you realize, hey, my wife is flirting with me, not because she's speaking, but something else I'm intuiting it. And I think that's significant as we think about how we're communicating meaning today. Yes, my body is involved in, if I look at Instagram or if I look at a video, watch a video, circulated on WhatsApp. Yes, my body's involved if I read my physical hard copy Bible. But I think there's something that is missed, that orality offers, that embodied orality offers. You say, why? Because what we can do in embodied communication is we can raise our tone of voice. We can use hand gestures. Our facial expressions change. There's close proximity, the way we use space, all of that. All of those are ways that meaning can be conveyed through oral communication. And in some ways, yes, it can be conveyed that way through digital media, particularly video, but something's lost when it's still only two-dimensional. And it certainly is lost when it's in printed text. So again, these are valuable resources, and praise God, we've had them, particularly during COVID. But I want to suggest that we need a deeper and more robust theology of communication. And I think orality offers us something, not the least because it's interesting. God was not satisfied to just send us a text message. He said, no, what they need is, yes, they need a text message, but more than that, they need an embodied presence. And Jesus Christ comes as the incarnate Son of God. And I want to just speak to that there, Ricki, because I think that is huge for those that are trying to embody the love and the life and the laughter of Jesus in Europe today. The actual physical being there today is so significant. And I wondered if oftentimes is undervalued. But I've come at it from a kind of theological perspective. Maybe we've run right by some people and they're saying, what do you mean by orality? So maybe just touch on that quickly. Practically speaking, what do we mean when we come out of orality, Ricki?
Well, it's interesting, and I think we can do that and look at it even in light of what you've shared. And thank you for that, taking us deep into the embodiment, because, when I think about orality and when we think about communication, there is a sense of, it's been described as how we receive, process, and then transmit information. That's really dealing with information at a purely kind of, basic level. But actually, what I'm hearing from you and what we see through the scriptures is that, well, God's way of doing it was really his best way of doing it was through sending his son. And the other ways he chose to do it was not just with the text message. He gave those 10 commandments, but actually, that was a text message. But actually, it took a messenger as well. It took Moses to send and deliver that message. And it didn't just take Moses as a messenger to deliver a message. He actually gave them ways of doing things. Now, I'm thinking about this now in light of Europe. Let's just switch to Europe and thinking, okay, well, we saw some of these principles, in the scriptures. We saw repetition. We saw symbol used. We saw singing, music. We saw storytelling. We saw ritual. All of these, these were the principles that actually, I believe, we've seen even and valued in our communities today. I think if they go beyond cultural and actually into how we were made as humans, they're still relevant today. I don't think ritual practices, not in the wrong way. Actually, what we've seen, people our traditions can be so enriching to a faith. Actually, we all know the value of singing, for example. Maybe sometimes if you go to a football stadium and hear fans singing for their teams, it shows you that actually there is an innate response within us that is kind of choosing to do that out of joy. Actually, I read an article recently that was saying that there are complex algorithms that can judge the state of the economy purely based on what people are playing on Spotify. Whether people are listening to sad songs or happy songs, or all of those things can actually give a sense of understanding, because we relate through the world through music in that way. So yeah, it's very interesting when we think that we have a people that we're disconnected at the moment. We've been separated from each other after COVID. We've media which does take us away from each other face to face is growing. How common is it to see families sitting around at a table in a restaurant where each one is on their own device, you know, embodied together, but disembodied from one another, you know, or, you know, whatever it might be. So my question,
well, I wonder if in some ways, how do you take advantage of the reach and the extensive reach of digital media and even textual media at some level still? But then how do you look for those kind of little acts of resistance where it's like, I'm going to put my phone down and actually engage in this conversation? Or, you know, what are the little rituals, and we don't even need to call them rituals, but like, what are the little practices that I could create in my neighborhood where I'm just looking for ways to share the love of Jesus, but they almost become rhythmic in a sense of like, okay, every Monday I'm taking a walk and I'm stopping by this neighbor, or I'm wanting to ask these questions because I want to hear their story. I wonder if just some of those, if we could actually borrow some of those practices from Scripture and incorporate them in what we're trying to do today.
Yeah, and actually apply them in our context. Now, you know, we, for example, here in Israel, we have some similar concepts from the biblical. So we got a bit of a head start, I guess. You know, we as a family, for example, celebrate the Sabbath each week. We're not super religious about it. We do drive, we do use our phones, but actually, you know, every Friday night we will gather with our family. We will, you know, make a special meal. It is a kind of sacred time, as it were. You know, we've been encouraged over the years to, you know, as a father, I'll speak blessings over my kids, and my kids will speak blessings over their mother. You know, but actually, some of those things that are, you know, we do that intentionally because we wanted that rhythm actually that God set up even in the scriptures to be part of our life, and for, you know, we wanted some of that intentionally, you know, my kids to know that every week there's words of blessing, words of life spoken over them, or to you know, in a culture which doesn't always value women, for example, for the mother of the home to be held up in high esteem. You know, reading Proverbs 31, you know, the woman of valor, and, you know, to have those words spoken over the woman of the house each week, that's actually a valuable practice, whether you're from this culture or not. So there might be cultural applications even in your own. I mean, perhaps what might be you have seen that would have value, or that a cultural application where you are.
Well, I wonder if in some ways it's that, like, how do we start small with our family and then try and think through how so that then it almost becomes natural in kind of our own home context, and then say, okay, then what of this can be transferred out? And is that actually what God was kind of inviting Israel to do, to be a witness, but then also the church to do, to saying these aren't just rhythms and patterns for your immediate family, these are rhythms and patterns for kind of the people of God. And how do I begin to look for ways to share these with those around me? So it's like, hey, I invite somebody to Sabbath meal or whatever it is, and not to put pressure on them, but to create opportunities for them to encounter the embodied, the oral, the non-textual, maybe even at times the non-digital presence and communication of God.
Well, what's fascinating, Billy, actually, I'm even thinking about this now, is that the digital can feature into it. I think, you know, we have to accept the reality that digital is part of our lives. And for example, right now, I would say that we are having a fully embodied conversation, and it's not any less embodied than if we were sitting face to face, I hope. And so therefore, you know, the digital is a tool that connects us with each other, but actually we can't get away from the fact that God, you know, like you've said, the personhood and the character and the nature of God, he's embodied, you know, he's in communion one with another within the Trinity. And he chose embodied communication with us, with humans on earth. Therefore, as humans, that's going to be how we connect. Now, it's not the orality that's the tool. The orality actually is that's how we're made, and the digital's the tool, actually. And, you know, there might be from time to time that digital is a tool, whether it's actually digitally telling stories, whether it's digitally connecting one with another, whether it's, you know, there is a value in it. And, you know, I see my kids' generation, they're all, it's almost their devices are attached to their bodies to the point where actually, maybe they can embody themselves through their devices and things. I don't know. That might be another question for another PhD somewhere. I don't know, but yeah. Well, we're running out of time. So, have you got any last thoughts, Billy, that you want to leave us with?
I just want to encourage that I do think in a day where sophistication and cutting edge is so revered and even worshiped at times, I want to suggest there is something to be said for those that are seeking to offer the love, the life, the light of Jesus, the laughter of Jesus in Europe today. There's something to be said about just being present. You and I become the temple of God. We become the symbol of his presence in a very dark Europe. And so how do we go about actually, how do we recognize, and maybe it's just that, Ricki, how do we recognize those people that are actually just embodying the presence, living the message of Jesus in their daily lives? And how do we encourage them to say, job well done? And hopefully you're using all the methods you can, whether it's digital or textual, but also we want to encourage you, don't undervalue or don't sell yourself short on how important it is just for you embodying the life of Jesus today in your community.
Excellent. Well, thank you. And we're going to open the time up now to questions, and hopefully we can have an embodied discussion one with another across the digital means, across Europe, across time zones. And we look forward to communicating with you now across the other side as real people. So thanks, Billy. Really appreciate it.